Tech billionaire Elon Musk has finalised a deal to buy social media giant Twitter for $44 billion US, or 61 billion Australian dollars. Let's just go with that one. Discussions accelerated over the weekend after he impressed many of Twitter shareholders with the financial details on his acquisition offer. Twitter shares rose 6% after the news was announced. The acquisition by the tech billionaire ends Twitter's run as a public company since its first public offering back in 2013 and will be one of the biggest acquisitions in tech history. Gas prices in the United States are reaching a record high of more than $4 US a gallon. As tensions grow, oil giant BP has issued a fine to a gas station over a sticker criticising Joe Biden. Sky News' Annalise Nielsen has the latest.
Fuel prices have risen to a national average of $4.12 a gallon, well above the $2.90 Americans were paying this time last year. As people become increasingly frustrated by what they perceive as a lack of government action, a trend kicked off to fix stickers to gas pumps of Joe Biden pointing at the high price, saying, "I did this," or "Biden did this." One petrol station owner from Reedsburg, Wisconsin, told Sky News she copped a $400 fine from her fuel supplier BP because people keep attaching the stickers to her pump.
US Vice President Kamala Harris has tested positive for COVID. Harris has not been in close contact with President Biden, though. The pair haven't met in person since the 18th of April because of conflicting travel schedules. She currently isn't showing any symptoms. The Vice President will continue to work remotely while isolating and will only return to the White House after returning a negative test result. Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused the West of attempting to destroy Russia and claims it was preparing to murder a prominent Russian TV journalist. He's demanded prosecutors take a tough line with the West as he detailed so-called plots by foreign spies to discredit his country and armed forces. Putin accused the West of inciting Ukraine to plan attacks on Russian journalists, which Kiev denies. He said the Federal Security Service had prevented a murder attempt by what he calls a terrorist group on a Russian TV journalist. He didn't provide evidence to support the statement, and news outlets have been unable to verify the accusations. The United States and NATO allies have pledged new military support for Ukraine despite warnings from Russia that further support could lead to nuclear war. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin made the announcement at an American airbase in Germany during defense talks with more than 40 countries. American officials are now bullish in their belief that Ukraine could win the war against weakened Russian forces.
Ukraine clearly believes that it can win, and so does everyone here. Ukraine needs our help to win today, and they will still need our help when the war is over.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reiterated warnings about the potential of a nuclear war, accusing Western allies of engaging in a proxy war.
Of course, these weapons will be a legitimate target for Russia's military acting within the context of the special operation. And the storage facilities, including those in western Ukraine, have been targeted more than once. How can it be otherwise? If NATO essentially engages in war with Russia through a proxy and is arming that proxy, war means war.
An Australian expat living in China has expressed his frustration at Shanghai's extreme lockdown. Chinese officials say it may soon be eased if new COVID testing shows the virus is no longer spreading. Justin Everett joins me live from Shanghai now. Justin, first of all, how are you going? How are you coping?
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me on the show. At the moment, not too bad. Hanging in there.
What are you doing? You're not even allowed out of the apartment, right?
No, I cannot leave my front door at all. I have to stay in my room, and the only time I can go out is when we're doing the COVID test. And even that's just like 5 minutes.
So that's all the exercise that you can get a day when you go outside to go and get a COVID test?
That is all I get.
And how closely do they watch you? Do the authorities watch you to make sure you don't, go and do a dash somewhere?
Well, so I live in a compound, and the guards are there to make sure no one goes in, goes out. But in terms of wandering around the building or the compound, I think they're not so strict on it. Well, my compound anyway. But for example, there's some close contacts next door from me, and they've got a monitor on their door to make sure that they don't leave. So
wow.
Yeah.
How are you going for food and water and supplies, Justin?
Food is hard to come by unless you are a part of a group. So you have to buy your groceries in bulk, basically.
Right.
There's no more deliveries for individual orders anymore. So, and we do get supplies from the government, but they're too infrequent and not enough, to be honest.
Security experts have backed Defence Minister Peter Dutton's comment that Australia must prepare for war. Mr Dutton drew comparisons between Russia and China now and Germany, saying they are a threat to global peace.
The only way that you can preserve peace is to prepare for war and to be strong as a country, not to cower and not to be on bended knee and be weak.
Defence experts say the nation's current military force is not yet equipped for conflict with China. It's way off, and warned Australia will likely have to lean on the US for support. Joining me live now from Rocky is the National Senator Matt Canavan. Peter Dutton says that we should be preparing for war. I guess if anywhere's hit, it'll be Queensland first if China moves into the Solomon Islands. But what do you make of his comments?
Well, that's a positive thought to start the morning there with Peter. But
sorry, I mean, it is a hypothetical, but it's what people are talking about.
I'm sure that there won't be a Brisbane line this time, so I know that our government, and hopefully any Australian government, would defend all of Australia, including up here in beautiful Yeppoon and North Queensland. And obviously this is something that is exercising the mind of all Australians. And I think the Labor Party here, it's far too little too late from them. They've spent the last few years mocking the federal government and our stance on warning about the threats of China. Indeed, only a few years ago, Penny Wong fought against our efforts to lower the threshold for agricultural investment in Australia. She wanted the Chinese to buy up to $1 billion of farmland each time. And they actually moved in the Senate to oppose us on that. We had the Labor Party saying that we were to be at fault, the federal government was at fault for the deterioration in the relationship with China. And so the Labor Party cannot walk away from that record now. That's been their record the last few years. Anything you say in the next few weeks before an election can't be trusted.
Joining us live from Cairns this morning is the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Prime Minister, good morning to you. Thank you for your time. Your government claims credit, though, when the economy goes well, but when the bad stuff happens, it's an international trend and you have no power. Surely you can't have it both ways.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that assessment, Peter. I mean, there is a war in Europe. There are global inflationary pressures. It is true that Australia's inflation rate is lower than in Europe and the United States and even in countries like New Zealand. They're all just facts. They are the facts. I remember during the pandemic when we were back in it and the Labor Party tried to blame us for a recession caused by the pandemic. If the Labor Party thinks that what is happening in the Australian economy on inflation or interest rates doesn't have anything to do with what's happening overseas, then it just shows that Mr Albanese doesn't know what the unemployment rate is. He doesn't know what's going on in the economy at all. And that's really the problem, because they don't have an economic plan to deal with this. We have, and that has shielded Australia from some of the worst impacts that we've seen from this pandemic and now the war in Europe.
Joining me live now is the Finance Minister, Simon Birmingham. Minister, good morning to you. So Labor is announcing its Pacific plan today. It's going to include a bunch of things, such as an increase of aid, doubling of aerial surveillance for economic zones in the Pacific. What are your thoughts on what you've been able to read and see so far?
Well, from what I can see, these appear to be token announceables designed for some cheap election headlines from the Labor Party, particularly when you compare them with the scale and effort of the Pacific step-up that our government has delivered over recent years. And we've increased development assistance for the Pacific from around $1.1 billion to $1.8 billion. We've established a $3 billion infrastructure fund that is delivering practical assistance into Pacific Island nations, providing around $700 million in climate finance into the Pacific, and our $2 billion Pacific Defence Investment Strategy is delivering practical equipment, patrol boats, to support Pacific Island nations. Compare that against a Labor policy that seems to think a few extra dollars for the ABC to project into the Pacific is somehow going to change the dial. Frankly, this is all about the headlines the Labor Party wants in the election campaign, rather than the substance. And
how do you feel now about China's influence increasing, particularly in our backyard, summed up by that security pact that it signed between China and the Solomon Islands, only about 1,700 kilometres off the coast of where you are right now?
Yeah, it is concerning. And we can't beat around the bush with this. The greatest threat to our national security is China. And what we've seen with this security pact in the Solomon Islands, in my view, it's a money grab from the Solomon Islands. We've been serving there through peacekeeping and also helping out the Solomon Islands people through aid, as well as military presence on the ground through riots. Only some months ago, soldiers from Townsville were in the Solomon Islands. We've always been there in support and helping the Pacific family. China comes in with, my view, a big bag of cash. We shouldn't be on one side, China on the other, and the Solomon Islands in the middle in a bidding war. We will always help our friends in the Pacific and our neighbours. But what we've seen here is China come in with a lot of money, my belief, and bought their way in. This is concerning, though. We need to be really honest about this. China likes to try and get into other nations and influence what they do, build ports and have military presence on the ground. So we need to be mindful of that and also keep an eye on it, because we cannot afford to have China infiltrate all through the Pacific, and we need to ensure that our relationships are as strong as ever.
Liberal MP Trent Zimmerman and Labor's Catherine Renshaw have teamed up during a federal election debate on Sky News, demanding Climate 200-backed independent candidate Kylie Tink come clean on who she would support as Prime Minister in the event of a hung parliament. Joining me live now is the Liberal MP Trent Zimmerman. Trent, good morning to you. Thanks for your time. So, yeah, it was an interesting and unlikely alliance that formed between yourself and the Labor candidate. Is that how much of a threat she is?
Well, no, because what we were asking for, I think, is a basic demonstration of transparency and integrity. And if you vote for me or if you vote for Labor, you know who's going to be in government after the election. And this election is about choosing the next government of Australia. But yet we have the Simon Holmes Court Climate 200 candidates refusing to be upfront with their own constituents, the people they want to vote for them, and not telling them who they would back in the event of a hung parliament, which is their stated goal. And I happen to think that my voters, the residents of North Sydney, have a right to know before the election what government they're going to get, not after, which is the approach of these so-called independents. Inflation figures out today. We're looking at some pretty bad ones. We could be heading towards, GFC-type levels, 15-year highs when it comes to inflation. It's all on the current government's watch. Yeah. What sort of an impact do you think this could have in the election?
Well, what a coincidence that the government payments happen to come in today.
It's almost like they planned this.
Oh, who would But look, obviously it has an impact. Cost of living's number one in terms of most polls for the most important issue. It's really a question of whether people think there'd be inflation under either government, perhaps worse under Labor, because they're less good at managing the economy. That's what the government will be hoping for. Look, they could have the inflation this week and an interest rate rise next week, a double whammy, the coalition. Yeah. And when Scott Morrison's getting up every day and saying, we're best on the economy, we're best on the economy, he can only really point to unemployment after that. So he'll be hoping there's no rate rise. He'll be pointing to the fact that other countries have higher inflation than us.
It feels like it's the right time now to bring in the former Defence Minister, Christopher Pyne, to reflect on how the election has gone this week. How would you look back on the week that was with Anthony Albanese in the basement, so to speak?
Well, I don't know whether the Labor Party headquarters will be pleased or not whether Anthony's out of isolation. They've had a reasonably good week and Anthony has not been doing press conferences and they've been showcasing their team. So they've had a better week than the first 2 weeks. I mean, the interesting thing about this campaign, Pete, is that the Labor Party should have been popping champagne corks a month ago, and yet they've had a 2-week lacklustre campaign. The government is having a good campaign. A month ago, Labor should have been clear air to win the election, and the government is back in it after 9 years of coalition government, with 2 difficult years because of COVID and a year of self-inflicted pain because of lack of discipline on the government side. And yet Scott Morrison is remarkably having a better campaign than Anthony Albanese. It remains to be seen how the last 3 weeks are. And I think it's fair to say, I'm being told by the people that I know in the coalition that the polling shows that the election is really line ball and everything will come down to the last 3 weeks and particularly the last 48 hours.
French President Emmanuel Macron is poised to secure a second term as the French president after defeating far-right challenger Marine Le Pen in the second round of voting. According to exit polls, Emmanuel Macron won 58.2% against Le Pen's 41.8%, so a significant margin in the end. Le Pen conceded defeat shortly after the polls closed. Emmanuel Macron will be the first French president in 20 years to win a second term. Marine Le Pen has ruled out reports that she plans to retire, claiming that she will continue her commitment to France and to the French.